Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as we look at Bowman football cards from 1991 through 1995. Now, the Topps Bowman cards of the 1990s came about because in the late 1980s, Topps wanted to capitalize on the romance of the old baseball cards of the 1950s. And they'd already started to do that with Topps Big, where they used the card size of the early 1950s Topps cards, and they used it for a whole card set that ran from 88 through 1990. And they were enjoyed, but they weren't really a mainstream set. So they wanted to capture the concept of Topps Big and really capture the imagination, the fascination with these old cards, but while making new cards. And so they took the brand name of Bowman and they reused that in 1989 to make cards that were based on the old Bowman card sizes, basically normal card size, and then a little bit taller, which makes them a little bit cumbersome. But overall, it was a really fun idea. And it was a simple border, and it didn't even have a name on the front. It was basically an autograph on the front, which was something they used to do. But the autograph functioned as the player name on the front. And then on the back, they had something of a box score design to give baseball nerds stats. And the nature of these cards, the way they were built, it didn't really work too well for general collectors. The card size was a little bit cumbersome, and the backs didn't really work too well. So Topps was going to have to kind of refine it, but that was the concept that it started out with. And in 1990, they improved the border design a little bit. They actually added the name to the front. The backs were very similar, but it was still kind of more of the same. So they were going to need to make a pretty significant change, especially because 1991 was coming, and that was the year where everybody had to get on their A game. And Topps definitely knew this. In fact, the main 1991 Topps set was something of a watershed year for card design for Topps. And Bowman had a significant increase as well. Now this is where our journey begins, because 1991 was the year that Topps released Bowman for football. And in this year, the cards were very much modeled after the regular Topps cards. So the card set was built in much the same way. It had some subsets. It was built with all the teams that were lined up from Atlanta all the way through Washington. And the card design itself was built in a more complex way than it had been done in the past. But the Bowman cards were done in a more simplistic way compared to the very elaborate Topps design. Also, the Topps cards used better imagery than the Bowman cards did. So the Bowman cards just didn't come out in the same way that the Topps cards did from that particular year. On the back, the Bowman cards were a little bit better than they'd been done in baseball because they got away from trying to play any tricks, but they didn't even give normal stats for the most part. The biggest weakness that these cards had, both for Topps and for Bowman in 1991, was that Topps was still using its traditional card stock. Now, it wasn't using the big fluffy card stock from the 1970s, but they were using more pressed cardboard, but it was still unbleached cardboard. So on the back, it looked like cardboard or wood, and on the front, it had a glossy surface that didn't really give the opportunity for really high-end imagery and detailing. And the back had no ability to provide, say, a color picture. So these cards were still stuck in the past, and that was the biggest weakness that the cards had in both cases, but that actually added something of a benefit for Bowman, as we'll get to in a second. So the card design, like I said, it wasn't all that impressive. They had a bunch of rookies spread out, but the rookies weren't called out on the cards. The only way you could tell that they were rookie was the fact that basically they were in their college uniforms. That was about it. But it was the three subsets of the set that had any sort of distinction. And it started off with star rookies, which are basically draft picks from the previous year. In the middle of the set, they had league leaders, and at the end of the set, they had playoff cards. So all three of these subsets, the big distinction that they had was the fact that they all had a gold foil emblem on them. The rookies, for instance, had a star on all of them. So every one of these gold foil emblems made these kind of archaic cards look really special, really distinctive in some particular way. And the way that they stood out made them stand out not just from the set, but pretty much across the board. Everywhere these cards were, they actually looked like they were something really distinctive. And Topps has been doing that lately with their buyback cards, where sometimes they'll put a foil stamp on an older card, and it makes the card look just radically different. So the only cards from this Bowman set that are of any note are these cards with the gold foil stamp. And it was an ironic little twist, but it worked. But otherwise, this set, there's nothing distinctive about it, and this was the last year of the true junk wax era. It was going to be transitioning, but this was the last major year, and Bowman was held back just as much as anybody else. They didn't have any inserts. They obviously didn't have any parallels. It was 91. So this was it, and the cards, they don't hold up over the years. That wouldn't be the case starting with 1992, however. With 1992, Topps wanted these cards to be better appreciated than the regular Topps cards, and they understood that, well, hey, if we got to cut back production, let's really cut back production on this. And for 92 Bowman, they really did do a great job. They cut back production so much that for me, myself, I didn't encounter these 92 cards till probably 1996. It was kind of weird to stumble upon them and have to figure out what in the world are they, because they weren't around. You couldn't find these cards very much. They weren't really all that popular. They had to earn their stripes. And so the fact that their existence basically disappeared from the market is what earned the stripes later on. So these cards have actually held up in value over the years better than most cards from the early to mid 90s. And it's a strange thing to see because the card designs are really pretty mediocre. These cards are designed with a modern high gloss card stock, basically a similar card stock to Stadium Club. The high gloss gives a better finish on the front, and on the back gives you the opportunity to do full color images, and they took advantage of that on this back. This card back looks great. It has normal stats on the back. The coloration and the design on the back reads really well. And on the front, the card design gets more simplistic from 91, but they rely more on the photo in this particular case, and the photos really aren't better. So these cards are surprisingly bland. They're surprisingly bland for normal circumstances, but especially for the fact that these are all valuable cards. If you have a stack of cards and you're flipping through them, you will never notice these cards as you're going through. But again, because of their low production number, they're actually very valuable cards. The rookies in the set are not distinguished from the regular cards in any way, not on the front, not on the back. They're just kind of there. And the whole card set structure is totally haphazard. They're spread out all over the place. It's a big wild array of cards. The only cards that are of distinction in this set are the three subsets. And the three subsets are not broken into places. They are spread out all over the place, but they're all gold foiled. And that's the distinction. The whole border around the outside is gold foiled. Now, they don't distinguish the subset on the front. They do that on the back. And they don't really talk about anything on the back. It's a surprisingly simplistic card design, just kind of letting you know that, yeah, this guy's of note. But three subsets are team leaders, playoff leaders, and long plays, which are basically like 90-yard club cards. And every one of the players who has a foil card also has a regular card. So they're not parallels, but they're a second card of all of these players. And the only other thing to say about 1992 is that they have SP cards, and the SP cards are not necessarily the foil cards. Many of the normal cards are SP cards, many of the foil cards are SP cards. So they have regular cards, they have regular foil cards, they have SP cards, they have foil SP cards. And so it's a big chaotic mess, which actually creates some fun in terms of collecting, trying to put together the set, finding these cards, chasing down SP cards. But other than that, there's really nothing else to talk about. But again, they had no parallels and they had no inserts, so that was pretty much 1992. For 93, they did more production, so these cards aren't worth quite as much, but they still are low production, so they're still worth quite a bit. The card design got more simplistic, but fortunately in this case, they got the pictures right. The pictures are a lot stronger, so these cards look a lot better. The card border went down to a very, very, very simple white border, and then they added some text elements inside. That's pretty much the front. But on the back, this is where these cards really shine. Now, the information that they have on the back is more football nerd stuff, which if you're into that stuff is great, but for the most part, it's really difficult to kind of appreciate the content on the back of the cards. But the card backs themselves look wonderful. They're very vibrant colors, very rich qualities of how everything's laid out, the image, the nature of all of it. And so it's a beautiful card design whether you can read it or not. But the card set itself is a big jumbled mess like in 1993. Everything's spread out. In this case, they actually don't have any subsets at all. It's all of the cards in the set are player cards and no player has more than one card. The rookies are, again, no different than the regular cards. They just look the same way. They don't really distinguish it on the back. But again, because the pictures look a lot better, the cards read a lot better. The only cards in the set that actually do stand out, that are actually distinctive, are foil cards that are not versions of cards They are actually just some of the players happen to have foil for their cards. And what makes these cards really interesting is the fact that instead of just having a normal gold foil card, this has the oil on water effect, where it has a kind of a wrinkly rainbow quality across the card. But the way that this is put on is not in a reliable way. It's actually every single card looks wildly different. And that means with the same player, every time you get one of his cards, it's always going to look a lot different, which means you can have two cards of the same player that look totally different. They're not parallels. They're just different finishes on it. And so if you like to get into those types of variations, you can have a lot of fun with this particular card set, but you can also really get yourself lost if you really don't know how you're structuring your attempt to try to get different versions of the cards, because literally every single card is different. But they are neat, the fact that you could get multiple copies of the same player that just all look pretty wildly different in some cases. Other than that, that's the set. There's nothing else to talk about with 93, just like with 92, very basic. With 94, they were able to continue the low production run as they had been all along, so these cards still hold up pretty well. But with these cards, they decided to really get into making these cards hold up design-wise, and the first step was getting rid of the border. These are full bleed cards. They also used the trick of making darker cards where the vibrance of the colors in the card are going to stand out a lot more. And by doing that combination, the cards hold up well. If you put them in a big sheet of cards, it looks terrible because they all get lost. The images all run together. But if you look at them on an individual basis, these are really, really good distinctive cards. And in that way, which is the way they intended for these cards to be, they wanted these cards to be collector's cards on an individual basis. And in that way, 94 really hit it well. But what really sells the front of these cards is that at the bottom they have some gold treatment of hash marks and the player's name all in gold foil in it. It's very simple, very minimalist, and it brings an elegance to the whole card design that really pulls it all together. The rookies in this set, again, are not differentiated on the front, but on the back they finally are. So for the first time in a Bowman set, the rookies actually are flagged as being rookies, which is actually a pretty big deal. Because a rookie card is a big deal, you want for it to feel like it's supposed to be that way. And this is the first set where they actually did that. Again, on the front, they look basically the same, but on the back, they actually stand out. Now, they also did foil cards again. This time they did all rookie team cards. So it's almost like a subset. It's not. It's again, the only player card for each of these players, but it's put together in a little grouping, so it actually looks kind of like a subset. And these are all rookie teams, and because there's no border, the way that they do the foil is they basically do a chromatic background. So the player is just the normal color image, and then the rest of it has a chromatic quality, and up on the side they have a really big logo etched in, an all rookie team logo etched into the card. So they stand out really well. These look really great. They are for players who had been rookies the year before, so they're not rookie cards, but they look great. But this was the mid-90s, and in the mid-90s, you had to be able to get into either inserts or parallels. You had to do one or the other. And Bowman was still trying to find its footing, and so it had to turn this direction. They opted not to go with the inserts, and so they went with the parallels, but they didn't get carried away with the parallels. They actually did something very different. They did something very subtle, and it was great. So the card design itself is, they went back to a white border. They added some detailing on the inside for additional border work that makes the card look very well designed. Again, we're seeing Topps hit a mark that we'd never seen them hit before. 94 was pretty good. 95, they were really finally starting to show that they could do this card design thing. And that was a unique thing to see from this company. But the thing that really made these card designs work for 1995 was the fact that they had gold foil on every single card, because the player name was in gold foil and the Bowman logo was in red foil. But the rookies also are somewhat distinctive in this particular year, because the gold foil is now replaced by silver foil. So all the rookies have silver foil, all the veterans have gold foil. It was a great thing that they did. And like in 1994, on the card backs, they also distinguished the rookies. But the first parallel is related to these rookies, or more specifically the first rounders. And not just first rounders, but almost entirely first rounders. For many of these cards, they have a parallel where they have a little first round draft pick logo that is planted on there in kind of a refractor type finish. And then also the player name, instead of being silver foil, has that refractor-like quality as well. So that parallel was something that Topps didn't really make a big deal out of it, so we didn't really know about it. It took a long time for us to even know the checklist, and we're still not entirely sure that we know the checklist, but we're pretty sure we've got it at this point. So that was like a hidden thing that we could find later on, kind of like the 92 SPs. But the very clear parallel came from the one subset in this entire set. Now this was 1995, and that meant that the Panthers and the Jaguars were the new expansion teams, and everybody was doing something for that. And in this case, it was no different. Almost all of the Jaguars and Panthers cards have a silver foil treatment across the entire card. They have the band around the outside that was white on all the other cards. In this case, it's all silver with little holographic stars sprinkled around through it. And then the whole background within that is silver etched in a big fan pattern. Again, it actually has all of these little stars that are holographic stars that are also embedded in there. And so only the player is not some silver holographic surface. And the cards are very, very lively, very vibrant. They're really cool cards, and they don't fit with the rest of the set at all. They're just stuffed right in the middle of this set. And again, it's the Panthers and then it's the Jaguars. But they made a parallel of the set, and this is what we all knew. That instead of silver, it's all gold. And these cards are so lively. These are among the most distinctive, most exciting cards from the entire 90s. They're not really talked about too much, partially because they don't have any stars in them. Mark Brunell didn't even have one of these cards. But they're hidden surprises where if you just want a great looking card, this is definitely a shortlist card for this whole era. But unfortunately, that just wasn't quite enough. For this time in card development, Bowman needed to kind of rethink itself. In baseball, they could kind of get away with what they were doing, so they continued through 96 and 97 to be making cards. But in football, they knew that by the end of 95, they needed to just stop and recalibrate and figure out what the next step was going to be. They had already created Bowman's Best, so Bowman's Best would continue the Bowman name through the course of 96 and 97. But as far as the main Bowman set goes, they wouldn't renew it until 1998, and then from then on, it's basically been pretty much the same set. But again, they had to rethink it and build something new, which they did. So that means that for Bowman, it ends with 95. I'll be looking at 98 on, which is a whole nother conversation later on. But I wanted to follow this exploration from 91 through 95 to give you an idea of what happened, where it got to, and to kind of see what just didn't quite cut it, even in 1995. So it was an interesting little run of cards. It's got some great cards in it, some fun cards, some pretty valuable cards, surprisingly valuable cards. But otherwise, there really wasn't much that they did with it. So let me know in the comments below what you think about these cards, if you've encountered them, if you're still trying to find some of these, because that 92 set really is pretty tough. And I hope that you learned something. I hope that you enjoyed this video. I hope that you'll subscribe and check out other videos that I do. And thank you very much for watching.